Hey there, good morning. Welcome to the JeepSolid Garage. I'm going to take you guys through the process of installing the Rough Country Slip Yoke Eliminator Kit. At the same time, we're going to do a rebuild on our np231 transfer case. It's a really good time to replace your gaskets and seals and the chain, very important. We're going to go through all that right now. I'm going to start out by double checking that I got all the fluid drained out because I don't want to end up with a big old mess. Next, let's remove the yoke to the front drive shaft. You need to block it up somehow. And this is what, 1 1/8? Yes, this is not an impact socket, but it's what I got handy because I did not have an 1 1/8 impact socket. So it sounds like I need to expand my tool collection. There's the yoke. Now next we're going to remove our speed sensor. Pay attention to the orientation of it because you got to get it back in the same way. And we're going to remove the tail cone here. I want to give you guys a quick look at what the slip yoke eliminator is going to do for us. So the rear output housing, we're going to get rid of that whole tail cone. So it's going to shorten up the length of our transfer case here so we can have a longer drive shaft, and that'll correct the angle. My Jeep there has about 3.5 inches of lift, so it's right at the maximum of what you can have without having a slip yoke eliminator. But by putting this on, it'll help get rid of some vibration in the drive shaft, so that'll be very helpful. And these are 13 millimeter and 15 millimeter. Now before we can take off the rear output housing here, gotta get this snap ring off the rear output shaft. Now we can take off the rear output housing here, 10 millimeter bolts. Now oil pump will come off. There's a little pickup tube at the bottom. See if we can slide it out. There we go, popped out. Now we are gonna rebuild this oil pump. There's a little O-ring here. We'll pull him out. And then there's a seal right here, which we're going to replace as well. We'll get this all cleaned up. And the kit I'm using, the transfer case rebuild kit, I'll be sure to link it in the description below, along with the Rough Country Slip Yoke Eliminator kit. And here's our new gasket and seal kit, and the oil pump O-ring is right down there, that little guy. There's the seal for the oil pump and the O-ring. I'm gonna just clean this up real quick and get those driven in. All right, oil pump is rebuilt. Let's break the case open now. Now we've got a combination of a couple different 15 millimeter bolts to take off here. 2 of the 15 millimeter bolts have washers on them, one on each end, kind of by the pry points to separate the case here. And then we have one 10 millimeter 12-point bolt, because they like to do things like that, and I can't find my 12-point socket, so I'm gonna have to use my 12-point box end wrench to take this guy off. All right, let's separate the case. A couple of pry points at each end. Break that RTV loose. And the gears and chain and everything on this actually look pretty good. I don't see any carnage. It looks like some of the pads on the shift forks are fairly new. I wonder if this has been rebuilt. Here's our magnet. There's a little bit of gunk on the magnet, but not as much as I've seen in the past. Magnet sets in right there. Here's our oil pickup tube. And our little screen on the bottom there. So that hooks up to our oil pump we rebuilt already. And this chain doesn't have a ton of slack. A little bit, so I do recommend replacing your chain because these do stretch, they wear out over time, so we're going to replace that. But the whole purpose of this was to put that slip yoke eliminator kit on this. This assembly will just lift out now. And I was having some leaks. My transfer case was leaking, so that's another reason why I want to do a rebuild on it. Got that rebuild kit. Replace all the seals and gaskets. All right, we got the shafts out and my mode fork. So next I'm going to work on the case here. Let's remove the range fork, just slips right out. And we will get some of these bearings, get our planetary gear out of there, start working on that. So let's flip the case back over here. We got to get to another set of snap rings. 4 little 10 millimeter bolts here. This housing has a couple little pry spots on it as well. And to drop the planetary gear out, there's one big old snap ring right there. I'm gonna get that guy off. Whew, and don't take that wrong. That's a bear to get out right there. That is not an easy one. Let's lift up our case here and we'll see a bunch of oil. And there's our planetary gear. Now we're gonna take this seal out right here and replace the bearing underneath there. This seal will just pull out, and then this bearing underneath there will just drive out. I don't believe there's a snap ring on that one. This one though, we're gonna replace this bearing as well. There's one last snap ring we gotta take out. This one's a lot easier than that planetary gear one that we just took out. So we're gonna pop that out real quick and get this bearing out, pop that seal out real quick, and drive that bearing out. I misspoke. There is one last snap ring we've got to get down in there to get that bearing out. All right, got those two old bearings out and the old seal. I'm gonna take the case now and clean it all up, get the RTV off of it. Then I'm gonna drive the new bearings into place and put the snap rings back in. This large one, I put the snap ring on the bearing first, on that ring on the bearing, and then drive it into place. This one, drive the bearing in, put the snap ring in, and then we'll drive the seal in. Well, that's awesome. Our new bearing came with a snap ring already installed. All right, as promised, got the transfer case cleaned up. We got the new bearing down in there with a snap ring holding it in place, new seal on top, and up here where our input shaft goes, got a new bearing there with the snap ring on it. Now we'll get our planetary gear put back in place, and we've got the snap ring to go on the outside here. Okay, I got my cover cleaned up here, a new seal put in. Before we put this on the input shaft there, we're gonna get just a little bit of transfer case fluid and get it on the lip here. We don't want this seal, the lip of the seal going on that input shaft dry. We're gonna get this all cleaned off super well, both surfaces, so there's no oils on it. And then a nice bead of RTV around all the bolt holes all the way around here. Avoiding this little trough right there. That's a little oiling well, and it'll line up with that little hole right there. Fortunately, the way they designed this, it can only go on one way, the way the bolt holes line up. So that little well right there will line up with that hole. So we're gonna clean it with brake clean real good, both surfaces, get RTV around there real good, and set it on there. Our bolts are all nice and cleaned up as well. Now we're gonna tighten this down just until we see a little bit of squeeze out of RTV all the way around. All right, that looks perfect. We're gonna let that dry for about an hour, then we're gonna come back and torque all four of those bolts to 16 foot-pounds. And while that's drying, let's put our new shaft in place here. There is one snap ring on the bottom here. We're gonna remove that. Now with this snap ring off, I'm gonna tip it up here, let everything fall off. We're gonna keep everything in alignment just like that. Now on my style, there's a couple needle bearings we still need to remove. Here you can see the two shafts side by side, and on our new one here, you can see the journal here is a little bit wider than that. This is my original, and we have needle bearings, two sets of needle bearings we gotta remove. So keeping everything in order, we gotta press those two sets of needle bearings out. If you have a later model, you might not have those needle bearings, and that's fine, it just slips right in. But let's remove those needle bearings and get to it. Now with those needle bearings out, we can just set it back together there. Now it'll all slide on to our new shaft. Now let's take our brand new snap ring and get it seated in place. All right, set that shaft and sprocket off to the side here, back how it's supposed to be with the chain. Took a break, had some lunch, let this dry for a little over an hour. Now I'm gonna go back and torque this to 16 foot-pounds. And then get on this seal here, just a tiny bit of transfer case fluid. We just don't want, when we put the yoke in here, we don't want it to run dry. Let's flip it over. Give me a little block of wood here to help stabilize it. And we'll put the mode fork back in place. Make sure that your little dowel there engages on the selector here. Slide it down into place. And we've got our new chain ready. So let's get rid of our old chain. Brand new chain. And don't forget to put the magnet back in place. All right, let's move on to putting the case back together. I got the front side all cleaned up here. There is another bearing right here you can replace, some needle bearings. This one, you kind of have to cut it out unless you have a special puller to pull it out, but you can replace that one as needed. So we're gonna start by cleaning the surface here really good with brake cleaner and the mating surface here as well. Now that we have our surfaces perfectly clean, we're going to get a good bead of black RTV. We're using black. We need an oil resistant RTV all the way around, and then all the way around the bolt holes as well. All right, we've got our beautiful bead of RTV all the way around. Our magnet is in place. Everything looks good. Our spring is there. We are ready to go. Got the oil pickup. We're going to put it in the back side of the case here. Slide into its little groove there and kind of hold on to it as we set this down in place. And now we've got all of our bolts here in order. We are going to put these in just finger tight until we see a little bit of RTV start to squirt out all around evenly. Once we see that little bit of RTV, we're going to let it dry for an hour and then come back and torque everything to 25 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to take some brake clean on our rag here, clean up this surface because we are going to end up RTVing this. Also, the tail housing here, we're going to clean up the surface of it as well so the RTV will stick real good. Now with those surfaces clean, we can take our oil pump here and our pickup tube right here. We got to make sure we get that engaged right there. Make sure your little O-ring is in there. We'll slide this down on and fish that little pickup tube into place. All right, now here's a little magical part. So the end of the shaft here is where the yoke is going to go, right? So yoke is going to fit on there, and we're actually going to have a little bit of RTV on these splines here. But now down here, there is a journal which the bearings inside of our housing here are going to ride on this journal, and we need oil there. And we're also going to get a little bit of oil on the lip of the seal here. So I'm going to clean off the end of the shaft here with a little bit of brake clean because we want to seal this. We don't want any leaks, so we want this clean. But I'll actually put a little bit of oil on the journal here and a little bit of oil on the lip of that lip of that seal and on the bearing inside there. So yeah, a little tricky. This needs to be clean and dry, and then you can have oil down there. All right, now that all of that is in place, we have two snap rings here. So this little speed sensor gear is going to go down there. First a snap ring is going to go there. Then the speed sensor goes on, then another snap ring right there. So we'll get those installed real quick. Now that the speed sensor gear is in place and the two snap rings, get a nice bead of RTV all the way around where the housing is going to go. And also, be sure to carry that bead all the way around this little stud there, because if you look at your housing, there's a channel on it there that oil is going to go through, so your RTV has to come all the way around the outside there. Now let's set the tail housing in place and get our 10mm bolts in. We're going to tighten it down just finger tight until a little bit of RTV starts to squeeze out of the edges. Then we'll let it sit for an hour, give that RTV a chance to cure, and we'll come back and torque it down to 18 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to install the rear yoke here. We're going to start by taking a bead of RTV and putting it in the back side here on the splines all the way around. Then we're going to take the rubber star washer that came with the kit and put it on top of the RTV. And this kit, I will be sure to link everything you're going to need for this rebuild and slip yoke eliminator. Amazon links in the description below. Be sure to check those out. I'll have RTV, snap ring pliers, everything you need down there. So then this just slides on. With the yoke in place, we're going to take the retaining nut, thread that on. After this RTV dries for about an hour, we're going to come back and torque this to 140 foot-pounds. I can put this plug in here, make sure the O-ring is in place. This is for a shift indicator, which we do not need to install for my application. And we'll install the speed sensor here as well. Be sure to double check the orientation when we took this out. We want to put it back in the same direction. Then we've got our retaining clip and nut here. Make sure your O-ring is in place on your speed sensor as well. And then the same thing on the front yoke. We're going to get a bead of RTV around the inside here. Our kit comes with the little star washer that fits on this shaft. And our nut here, then we're going to torque this guy down to 110 foot-pounds. And then after that, we're about done. We just got to fill it up with ATF plus 4. I really like to let it sit for a good 24 hours, let all that RTV fully cure. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out those links in the description below. Our SYE is done. Woohoo! Well, almost. I'm going to do those things I just talked about. I need to clarify that part. I like to let the RTV fully cure for 24 hours before I add the ATF transmission fluid.